That are filled to the Middle East, their temperatures in parts of Iraq have been over 50 degrees Celsius for days now. This, we understand, has led to power cuts and protests. There are also fears of mass spoiling of food supplies and public holidays being called for many workers due to the heat. Our correspondent, Olly Baratt, is in Erbil, in the northern part of Iraq, joining us now this hour, standing out there in the heat, in the sun. Olly, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your time and your patience out there in the heat. How bad is it this afternoon?
Well, where I am in the north of Iraq, it's around 42, 43 degrees Celsius right now. Bear in mind that it's nearly 6 p.m. in the evening local time. And actually the forecast says it's going to get hotter in the coming days ahead. But also in other parts of Iraq, we've seen temperatures much higher than this in recent days, touching or just above 50 degrees Celsius in places like Basra in the south of the country. Now, people in Iraq will tell you that this is not uncommon to get temperatures like this, but what they will say is, A, it's becoming more frequent during the summer that temperatures like this are seen, but also when we do get these very high temperatures, they tend or seem to be lasting for longer. And so the very recent heat wave that we've been seeing has seen day after day after day of 50 degrees Celsius temperatures in some Iraqi cities and areas, and that is really making it very, very difficult indeed for the people that live in those places, not least because one of the things that causes is even more power outages than you would normally see in a country that sometimes struggles with its power supplies. And what that leads to, as you're saying, is less air conditioning for people that need it. It leads to fridges and refrigerators breaking down as well, and the spoiling of food. In the recent outbreak of heat in the city of Basra, people were saying that even at night temperatures weren't going below 40 degrees Celsius. And for those people that either can't afford air conditioning or don't have access to it because of power outages, that is leading to some very hot days and nights indeed.
Yeah, and have there been a lot of protests?
There have been protests in response to the government's ability to really do much for the people of this country. We have seen public sector workers at times being given holidays, being told don't come to work, it's simply too hot, over those periods when those temperatures around 50 degrees Celsius have really been persisting for a number of days. But that, of course, doesn't apply to all workers in the economy, and for many in casual sectors, in farming, in agriculture, in labouring, they will say, we can't just pack up tools and go home. We have to work to get paid. We can't afford to take the day off, and so we have to work through these intense temperatures. And those power supply issues have been the cause of some of the protests that we've been seeing in parts of Iraq. That is also partly related to the political crisis that's unfolding in Baghdad. We now haven't had a fully functioning government in Iraq for over 300 days since elections here, because the parties simply haven't been able to come to the coalition that is required. And so we have effectively a caretaker government in place. What that means is that, for example, the energy ministry isn't able to fully respond to some of these issues around power supply in the way that it would normally like to do. So yes, there have been protests. There's real anger on the part of many Iraqis, and they're really looking ahead to a future here, as are many countries, in which they expect to see temperatures like this on a more frequent basis and for longer periods of time.
Away from the weather, let's talk about the reconstruction of Mosul airport, which I understand is now underway or has been launched some 5 years after the battle to expel ISIS.
Yeah, and it's really illustrative of the way that parts of the country still haven't really fully recovered from the takeover that we saw by those ISIS militants, and Mosul was at the center of that. And Mosul airport was a key battleground between Iraqi forces and ISIS militants, and it was effectively completely destroyed. 5 years on, that reconstruction project is really getting underway now, and the government here expects that it will take a couple of years to finish. Mosul used to be one of the key airports, one of the biggest hubs here in Iraq, so it will very much benefit the economy if authorities can get it back online. It's part of a major rebuilding project for that city. $260 million or so is being allocated by the Iraqi government to try and rebuild the airport, but also health sector, the education sector as well. But as I say, 5 years on from some of those central battles with ISIS militants in Iraq, and parts of the country are still very much in recovery mode.
Yeah, and that conflict led to thousands of Iraqis fleeing their country and taking refuge in neighboring countries like Syria. I understand now there's an effort to repatriate some of them back home.
Yes, particularly from one key camp inside the Syrian border, which has been housing many Iraqi refugees. And many of those refugees are family members of people who fought in the ISIS group. And so there have been difficult discussions underway about how exactly to get some of those people home, what would happen to them when they get here. We're told that they will be looked after on their return to Iraq, but dozens and dozens of families, it's now been agreed, will come home to Iraq in the coming months from this particular refugee camp over the border in Syria. Many of those Iraqis say, look, yes, our family members were part of ISIS, but we had nothing to do with that, and therefore we should be able to come home and able to continue our lives. And the central government here in Iraq is effectively agreeing part of a plan now to get that process moving.
Thank you very much, Olly Baratt, there in Erbil, in the northern part of Iraq, updating us about some of the developments there, like the heat wave. I mean, 50 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Celsius, you start burning. It's unbelievably hot. That's the impact, of course, of climate change.